Okay, good morning. My name is Ben Jones, and the topic I chose for my 909 capstone project is the wildfire that destroyed Lahaina, Maui this past summer. As I go through this presentation, feel free to interrupt me at any time with any questions as they come to you. On August 8th, 2023, around 7 a.m., a brush fire started when a power line fell in the grassy hills above Lahaina. Firefighters initially extinguished it and moved on to other brush fires that were popping up around the island, but around 3 p.m., the fire flared up again and was pushed by high winds downhill, where it destroyed almost the entire town of Lahaina in about 4 hours. It was a catastrophic disaster that left 97 people dead, 2,200 structures destroyed, and at least 7,000 people displaced or homeless. The combination of factors was responsible for the severity of the fire and the speed that it engulfed Lahaina, the most obvious of which was Hurricane Dora. On August 8th, Hurricane Dora was a Category 4 storm located approximately 500 miles due south of Maui. While the storm didn't make landfall, the geography of Hawaii funneled high-speed winds into the channels between the islands and between mountain ranges, creating localized regions of very high wind, measured up to 70 miles per hour near Lahaina. And the center figure, taken from the afternoon of August 8th, shows the interaction between the islands and the localized area of high winds. The winds are responsible for downing the power line, propelling the fire towards Lahaina. The Maui Division of Land and Natural Resources maintains helicopters for fighting the brush fires, but the heavy winds prevented them from taking off and responding to the flare-up when ground crews are deployed elsewhere in the early afternoon. In addition to the winds, a severe drought had been affecting the west side of Maui for at least 4 years, creating water shortages and conflicts over water rights between the local community and nearby resorts. This was exacerbated by unusually low humidity the week of the fire, likely due to Hurricane Dora siphoning moisture from the atmosphere to the south. And finally, the fire started in dense, very dry grassland adjacent to the town. This grassland is primarily comprised of invasive species and was extremely flammable due to the prolonged drought and low humidity the day of the fire. This invasive grass became a flashpoint in the public debate as to the fire's causes and the focal point of this project. In order to talk about invasive grasses in Hawaii, we have to start with how they got there. It's impossible to separate nearly any aspect of life in Hawaii today without acknowledging the influence the sugar plantations had on the islands in the 19th and 20th centuries. From the division of use of land, the decline of native forests, the ethnicities of the Hawaiian citizens and the distribution of where and how they live, even the dialect that they speak, were all heavily influenced by a handful of corporations that dominated the economy, government, landscape of Hawaii for over 100 years. When they arrived in the 1840s, they cleared the native forest from any arable land to cultivate sugarcane. When they began to decline in the 1950s, they left behind vast swaths of barren landscape that were quickly overtaken by grasses such as buffalo grass, which has been brought from Africa to support cattle grazing. Today, still, 27% of the entirety of the land area on Maui is still zoned for agriculture, which is significant given the rugged terrain and limited buildable space on the island. The image on the right shows a field of buffalo grass burning above Lahaina in 2009. This grass and species like it grow rapidly. They're resistant to pesticides and competitive with native plants. It contributes to a phenomenon known as the grass fire cycle, during which grasses burn during the dry season, creating destructive fires, which clears more land for more grass to grow, which in turn contributes to a higher fuel load for the next fire. People living in West Maui noticed this pattern. It didn't take long before the blame is being assigned to the landowners responsible for these explantation lands being overtaken by buffalo grass, because had they practiced better land management, the fuel source for the fire would not have been available on August 8th. Multiple lawsuits have been filed against the owners of the land where the fire started, citing a failed responsibility for land management that would have prevented the fire. In one notable filing, a defendant is accused of failed responsibility for land management akin to the storage of high explosives. This brings us to the ultimate question of the study. Can we prove with GIS techniques and technology that the owners of the explantation lands bear a personal responsibility to prevent fires like the one on August 8th? And, as a secondary question, is there a connection between the decline of industrial sugar production and the Maui wildfires? In order to answer these questions, I wanted to look at the distribution of dry grassland of the type that burned across Maui, and compare that to tax map key parcels to determine if a significant enough share of that high-risk grassland was privately owned by what remains of the sugar plantations. This approach used free government data in the form of landside imagery and public record tax map key parcels. The analysis is broken out into 4 phases. First phase is the burn zone identification. I collected multispectral imagery from before and after the fire, a Landsat 9 collection level 2 analysis ready data, or ARD. The analysis ready data is already converted to surface reflectance and already includes a quality assurance band, which is used to remove clouds and cloud shadows from the images. Moving through the flowchart, I merged each spectral layer into a single multiband raster dataset, then identified clouds in the QA band and clipped them from the multiband images. Next, I removed nearshore reflections and water features by clipping that image using the Maui coastline. Once I had 2 multispectral images with clouds and water removed, I calculated the normalized burn ratio for each and subtracted the 2 images to obtain the difference normalized burn ratio, or DNBR. The DNBR highlighted the burned areas and provided me with spectral characteristics of the dry invasive grasses that burned on August the 8th. The second phase was image classification. I was primarily interested in the distribution of invasive grassland, so I used the burn zones from the DNBR to guide my training samples for that class. I came up with 7 other classes I thought represented general land cover types and collected training samples for those classes from the pre-fire Landsat image using the higher resolution base map as a guide. The training samples were used in a pixel-based 4 nearest neighbors classification scheme. Once trained, I removed the training samples from the pre-fire image and classified it using the nearest neighbor scheme. Phase 3 was validation of the classification. I generated 30 validation sites per class for a total of 240 validation sites and distributed them randomly throughout the classified pre-fire image. I looked at each site individually and determined the true class using the pre-fire image in the Esri high-resolution base map when required. Once all sites have been ground truthed, I populated a confusion matrix to collect validation statistics for each class and for the model as a whole. And finally, phase 4 was the land cover analysis. Assuming that tax map key parcels zoned for agriculture were representative of the old boundaries of the sugar plantations, I collected statistics for the total area of dry invasive grassland within agricultural parcels and then divided those parcels by ownership. Personal information on privately owned parcels was not available, but government ownership was. So this served as the basis for answering the question of whether private landowners of explantation lands bear a responsibility to prevent wildfires. Again, the 4 phases of the analysis. Quadrant 1 shows the final difference normalized burn ratio calculated from the cloud-free multispectral Landsat 9 analysis-ready images. The areas in red are the areas that burned on August the 8th. Quadrant 2 shows the initial training of the classifier. There are 8 total classes. Active farmland, representing open green space due to active farming and irrigation, golf courses, residential lawns, and gardens, shown in pink. Exposed rock, representing barren areas free of substantial vegetation, typically found at higher altitudes above the tree line, shown in brown. Fallow farmland, or dry grassland, representing areas matching the spectral characteristics of the buffalo grass that burned on August the 8th, shown in yellow. Forested wetland, coastal areas of dense, healthy vegetation, primarily found on the windward side of the island, shown in bright green. Lava fields, or ancient lava flows that are distinct in appearance from barren soil, shown in black. Residential housing, comprised of single-family homes and lawns, shown in light blue. Urban commercial zones, paved highways in the airport, shown in gray. And finally, evergreen forest or mid-altitude old growth forest, shown in dark green. Quadrant 3 shows the validation sites randomly distributed throughout the classified image. Note that for an appropriate classification, all of the training sample areas had to be removed. And quadrant 4 shows the final classification with privately owned agricultural parcels overlaid in blue. Some detail on the results of the classification here. This is my confusion matrix showing the performance of each class and of the nearest neighbor scheme as a whole. Highlighted in green, the green box is precision, or the portion of samples from each predicted class that belong to that class. This tells us how well the model identified each class. And in yellow, the yellow box is recall, or the portion of samples from the ground truth class that were correctly classified in the validation sample. In other words, how many validation points were correct. The green box, precision, reflects the class performance, and the recall, or the yellow box, reflects the validation accuracy. Drawing your attention to the cells highlighted in yellow, these are areas where the model did not perform well. In particular, the model often confused the residential class with either active or fallow farmland, and often confused the urban class with either exposed rock, lava field, or forested wetland. These observations are noted in the conclusions on the next slide. The overall performance of the model is scored by the kappa statistic on the bottom left of the table. A kappa of 61% is shown, indicating medium agreement at best between the classification and ground truth. So we can say this nearest neighbor model did not perform as well as hoped. The chart at the bottom shows the results of the land use analysis. Of particular interest here is the fact that the total area classified as fallow farmland or high-risk grassland, only 25% of it is privately owned. The remainder is managed by a mixture of state and federal government agencies. Also of note is that the correctly identified dry grassland, 38% of it is not zoned for agriculture at all. So on to my conclusions. There's three major takeaways from the study. First, the low precision for the residential and urban classes, confusing dry grassland for each, as well as the model kappa at 61%, indicate that the model needs to be refined. The current model likely underestimates the amount of high-risk grass. More training samples may reduce these performance metrics even further. More validation samples. Second, 38% of the area classified as dry grassland was not zoned for agriculture. This makes it hard to draw a connection between the decline of sugarcane and the increasing frequency of wildfires because nearly half the type of land that burned may have never been used for agriculture to begin with. The major caveat to this conclusion was that the study used current tax map key parcels and did not take credit for any rezoning that may have occurred prior to the Maui fire. Third, only 25% of the correctly identified dry grassland was privately owned. The rest is owned by county, state, and federal government. However, the Lahaina fire is difficult to judge by this landscape scale metric because of its small geographic extent. So to answer the questions posed at the beginning of the study, with regard to the headlines of private landowners being held responsible for the fire, these conclusions indicate that those landowners do not bear a substantial share of the responsibility for land management for future fires. In addition, assuming agricultural zones have not changed, there's a limited connection between the decline of industrial sugarcane production and the frequency of Hawaii wildfires. So to close, the study showed that the responsibility for land management is shared, and that by assigning blame for tragedies like August 8th is unproductive, without understanding that the fire was caused by a combination of multiple simultaneous factors. And thank you for attending. This concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions.